December 22, 1944, 3 kilometers southeast of Bastogne, Belgium. The frozen earth trembled beneath Oberst Heinrich Kakat's boots as he crouched in what remained of a stone farmhouse, studying a tactical map by the light of a failing candle. As commander of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, he had spent the past week trying to strangle the American pocket at Bastogne, throwing regiment after regiment against the perimeter in attacks that should have overwhelmed the surrounded defenders. The mathematics favored Germany. His division, combined with elements of 2 panzer divisions, outnumbered the trapped Americans. They held every road, controlled every approach, and possessed the initiative. Victory should have been inevitable. Yet his forces were being systematically destroyed by an enemy they could barely see. The culprit was not American infantry, nor their armor, nor even their air power, grounded by the same winter storms that had enabled Germany's Ardennes offensive. The weapon eviscerating his division arrived without warning from the sky, transforming German assembly areas into abattoirs before attacks could even begin, shattering defensive positions when his troops tried to consolidate, and pursuing retreating units with methodical precision that suggested an almost supernatural awareness of his every movement. American artillery. Kakat had fought on the Eastern Front, where Soviet artillery barrages were legendary in their brutality. He had survived Normandy, where Allied naval guns hurled shells the size of automobiles. But this was different. This was not the indiscriminate pounding of massed batteries firing in sequence, offering seconds of warning as shells walked toward their targets. This was instantaneous annihilation, dozens of batteries firing from different positions, at different ranges, with shells arriving at precisely the same second, in a concentration of violence that defied everything he had been taught about artillery coordination. At 8:47 hours that morning, Kakat had ordered his reserve battalion, the 78th Grenadier Regiment's 3rd Battalion, to move into an assembly area near Assenois for a planned attack. The battalion commander, Major Ernst Lutzendorf, had positioned his companies in a tree line providing overhead cover from air observation, following standard tactical doctrine. The Americans were 3 kilometers away. German forward observers reported no movement in the American lines, no obvious preparation for defensive fire. Lutzendorf radioed that his battalion was ready, 540 men in good positions, morale acceptable despite the cold and limited rations. Kakat gave the order to advance at 9:30 hours. At precisely 9:28 hours, 2 minutes before the scheduled attack, the tree line where the 3rd Battalion waited simply ceased to exist. No preliminary ranging shots. No registration fire. No warning salvos. One moment, 540 German soldiers crouched in what they believed was a safe assembly area. The next moment, shells from 105mm howitzers, 155mm howitzers, and heavier guns arrived simultaneously, creating a zone of destruction so complete that German survivors would later struggle to find words adequate to describe it. Trees were not merely hit, they were atomized, transformed from timber to splinters to sawdust in microseconds. The frozen ground erupted in fountains of earth and shrapnel. Men disappeared, not killed, but erased, their bodies reduced to fragments scattered across hectares of devastated landscape. The bombardment lasted exactly 90 seconds. 90 seconds of concentrated, mathematically precise devastation. When silence returned, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of small fires, the 3rd Battalion had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Of 540 men, fewer than 180 could walk. Of those, perhaps 90 were physically and psychologically capable of combat. The rest were dead, wounded, or so thoroughly shattered by the experience that they could do nothing but stare with vacant eyes at the smoking ruins around them. Kakat received the casualty report at 10:15 hours. He read it 3 times, certain there had been a mistake. 70% casualties, before the attack began, from artillery fire that had lasted less than 2 minutes. He pulled out his own casualty records from the Eastern Front, comparing them against this single incident. In 3 years of fighting in Russia, his division had never sustained such catastrophic losses so quickly from any single weapon system. The implications slowly crystallized in his mind with the cold clarity of absolute certainty. Germany had already lost this war, not because of this battle, not because of this campaign, but because the enemy possessed the industrial and technological capability to deliver this level of violence, not occasionally as a spectacular demonstration, but routinely, systematically, wherever and whenever they chose. If the Americans could drop coordinated artillery fire without warning on any target, at any time, with this degree of precision and destructive power, then every offensive operation became impossible. Mass forces for an attack, and American artillery would destroy the assembly area. Establish defensive positions, and American artillery would obliterate them. Attempt to retreat and consolidate, and American artillery would pursue. There was no tactical solution. No operational brilliance could overcome it. No amount of courage or training could compensate. The Americans had transformed warfare into an industrial process where mathematics defeated bravery and logistics trumped tactics. That realization, multiplied across hundreds of Wehrmacht officers experiencing similar revelations in forests and fields across Western Europe, marked not just a tactical defeat but a psychological collapse. This is the story of how German military professionals, men who had conquered most of Europe with tactical brilliance and operational excellence, came to understand that they were fighting an enemy whose approach to warfare was fundamentally different and fundamentally superior. The Wehrmacht that went to war in September 1939 possessed what many historians consider the finest artillery arm in Europe. German artillery doctrine, refined through decades of study and validated in Poland, France, and the early campaigns in Russia, emphasized precision, efficiency, and conservation of resources. The foundation of German artillery power was the 10.5 centimeter light Feldhaubitze 18, the light field howitzer model 1918, though it entered service in 1935. This weapon, universally known as the FH-18, equipped every divisional artillery battalion in the Wehrmacht and represented the culmination of German artillery engineering between the wars. The FH-18 fired a 14.98 kilogram shell to a maximum range of 10,675 meters at a muzzle velocity of 470 meters per second. Its split trail carriage provided 56 degrees of traverse, allowing the gun to engage targets across a wide arc without moving the entire weapon. The sighting mechanism, the Model 34, was considered the most sophisticated in Europe, making it easier to track and engage moving targets than comparable Allied systems. A well-trained crew could achieve a firing rate of 6 to 8 rounds per minute under ideal conditions, though sustained fire rates were typically 4 to 5 rounds per minute to preserve barrel life and maintain accuracy. The gun itself was a masterpiece of engineering. The barrel was rated for 10,000 to 12,000 rounds before replacement, far exceeding most contemporary designs. A pneumatic recuperator above the barrel used compressed air and liquid to return the gun to firing position after each shot, while a sophisticated recoil system absorbed the weapon's violent kick. The gun shield protected the crew from small arms fire and shell fragments. 28 different ammunition types could be fired, from high explosive to armor-piercing, smoke to illumination, giving battery commanders flexibility to respond to varied tactical situations. From 1935 to the end of the war, Germany produced 11,848 FH-18 howitzers, along with 10,265 of the improved FH-18/40 variant. This was not insignificant production. It represented a massive investment of resources and industrial capacity. Each divisional artillery regiment possessed 36 of these weapons, organized into 3 battalions of 3 batteries each, with 4 guns per battery. Wehrmacht artillery officers trained extensively, mastering the complex mathematics of indirect fire, the intricacies of meteorological corrections, and the coordination required to mass fires from multiple batteries. German fire direction doctrine emphasized accuracy over volume. Each shell was precious, representing valuable resources that could not be easily replaced. Fire missions were carefully planned, with extensive survey work to establish precise gun positions, detailed terrain analysis, and methodical registration fire to ensure accuracy before engaging actual targets. The doctrine worked brilliantly in Poland, where German artillery supported rapid armored advances with precision fires that destroyed Polish strong points and disrupted enemy movements. It worked in France, where carefully coordinated artillery preparation broke through the Maginot Line's northern extensions and supported the drive to the Channel. It worked in the early phases of Operation Barbarossa, where German artillery shattered Soviet defensive positions and enabled the great encirclement battles that captured hundreds of thousands of Red Army soldiers. Wehrmacht officers had every reason to be confident in their artillery arm. They had defeated every enemy they had faced. Their doctrine was sound, their equipment excellent, their training superior. The La FH-18 was not just adequate, it was widely considered one of the best field howitzers in the world. But the doctrine was built on assumptions that were about to collide with a fundamentally different approach to warfare. While Germany refined its artillery into a precision instrument, America was building an artillery system based on different principles entirely. The American philosophy of warfare, shaped by industrial abundance and pragmatic engineering, emphasized overwhelming volume, systematic coordination, and the application of mass production techniques to military operations. At the heart of the American field artillery arm was the 105mm howitzer M2, designated the M2A1 in its improved form. First adopted in 1940, the M2 represented American artillery philosophy in steel and mathematics. The weapon fired a 14.98 kilogram shell, the same weight as the German La FH-18, to a maximum range of 11,270 meters, slightly farther than its German counterpart. But the similarities ended there. The M2 was designed from the beginning for mass production, with simplified manufacturing processes that allowed American industry to produce the weapon in quantities that would have seemed impossible to German planners. By the war's end, 10,202 M2A1 howitzers had been produced, a number roughly equal to total German production, but achieved in less time with greater industrial efficiency. More significantly, the M2 was designed for a different tactical employment. While German doctrine emphasized careful preparation and methodical fire missions, American doctrine emphasized speed, volume, and flexibility. A well-trained American crew could fire 10 rounds per minute for the first 3 minutes of a fire mission, a rate of fire that German gunners found difficult to believe when they first encountered it. Sustained fire rates were 3 rounds per minute, capable of being maintained for extended periods without damaging the weapon or exhausting the crew. This difference in sustained fire rate, 3 rounds per minute versus 4 to 5 for the German weapon, seems minor until the implications are understood. American batteries were not expected to carefully ration ammunition. They were expected to fire, continuously and in volume, whenever fire missions were called. The logistical infrastructure to support this doctrine was built into American operations from the beginning. Every American infantry division was equipped with 36 M2 howitzers, the same number as a German division. But American divisions also possessed substantially more artillery at corps and army level. American doctrine called for massing fires from multiple battalions onto single targets, a practice that German doctrine recognized but rarely achieved due to communication limitations and ammunition constraints. The real revolution, however, was not in the guns themselves, but in the systems surrounding them. American artillery officers developed a technology that transformed artillery from a supporting arm into a dominant weapon system. The Fire Direction Center, a concept that seems obvious in retrospect, centralized all the calculations, communications, and coordination required for artillery fire missions into a single location, equipped with specialized personnel and equipment. Inside a fire direction center, typically housed in a truck or tent near battalion headquarters, teams of specialists worked with graphical firing tables, slide rules, and mechanical calculators to solve the complex ballistic equations required for indirect fire. Every variable that affected shell trajectory was accounted for. Range and azimuth, obviously, but also temperature, barometric pressure, wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes, the rotation of the Earth, the wear on individual gun barrels, and even the lot number of the specific ammunition being fired, as different manufacturing batches had slightly different ballistic characteristics. This data was processed rapidly, typically within 2 minutes of receiving a fire mission, and transmitted to individual batteries via radio. Each gun crew received specific firing data, pre-calculated to account for their exact position relative to the target. The system's elegance was in its systematization. Individual gunners did not need to be mathematical geniuses. They simply needed to follow the data provided by the Fire Direction Center, set their sights to the specified deflection and elevation, load the correct charge, and fire on command. The intelligence was in the system, not the individual, which meant that American artillery could maintain consistent performance even with minimally trained crews, though American crews were far from minimally trained. The mathematics underlying American artillery superiority can be expressed in several ways, but the 10-to-1 ratio referenced by German officers had multiple dimensions. In ammunition production, the disparity was even more dramatic than 10-to-1. American factories produced approximately 70 million rounds of 105mm howitzer ammunition during the war. German production of 10.5cm ammunition totaled approximately 35 million rounds. This 2-to-1 advantage in production was compounded by the fact that American guns were expected to fire at substantially higher rates, meaning that the effective disparity in rounds delivered to targets was closer to 4 or 5-to-1 in typical operations. In major operations, where American ammunition stocks were fully available, the ratio could reach 10-to-1 or higher. During Operation Cobra in late July 1944, American artillery fired at rates that left German defenders unable to comprehend what they were experiencing. But the true revolution was not in the guns or even the ammunition, but in the coordination technique that made American artillery uniquely devastating. Time on target, almost always referred to by its abbreviation TOT, was developed independently by British and American artillery officers in the early years of the war. The British version, created for counter-battery fire in North Africa in 1941 and 1942, used BBC radio time signals to synchronize watches, allowing multiple batteries to open fire simultaneously without using military radio networks that might compromise surprise. The American version, developed in 1943 and refined throughout 1944, took the concept further. Instead of merely firing simultaneously, American fire direction centers calculated precisely when each shell would impact based on the time of flight from each gun's position. Batteries firing from different ranges, with different weapons, were given staggered fire commands so that all shells, regardless of their origin, would arrive at the target at exactly the same second. A 105mm shell fired at high angle from 8 kilometers might take 23 seconds to reach its target. A 155mm gun firing from 12 kilometers might require 31 seconds. Under the TOT system, the 155mm gun would fire 8 seconds before the 105mm howitzer, ensuring unified arrival. When executed properly, a TOT strike gave the target no warning. No ranging shots, no preliminary salvos, no crescendo of increasing intensity. Silence, then instant, overwhelming violence, then silence again. The psychological impact was profound. Soldiers in defensive positions have a brief window after the first artillery impact to seek better cover, to go prone, to hunker down and minimize their exposure. Studies conducted by the U.S. Army in the 1970s quantified what observers noted during the war. At the moment of impact, only 9% of soldiers in hasty defensive positions were prone, 33% were prone with some additional cover, 58% were standing or moving. Within 2 seconds of the first impact, these figures changed dramatically. Only 29% remained standing, while 56% were prone with protection. After 8 seconds, essentially all soldiers had achieved maximum protective posture. Those first few seconds were critical. Casualties in an artillery bombardment occurred disproportionately in that initial window. A conventional barrage, with shells arriving sequentially, gave defenders time to react. A tot strike eliminated that window entirely. The first shells were also the last shells, all arriving together in a concentration that maximized casualties and psychological shock. German artillery officers understood the concept when it was explained to them after the war. Several admitted that they had considered similar techniques but dismissed them as impractical. The coordination required seemed impossible given the limitations of field communication systems and the computational complexity of calculating staggered firing times for multiple batteries at different ranges. What German officers failed to anticipate was American willingness to invest in the infrastructure required to make the impossible routine. Every American artillery battalion was equipped with multiple SCR-610 radio sets, powerful FM radios that provided clear, reliable communication between fire direction centers, forward observers, and individual batteries across distances of 30 to 40 kilometers. German artillery relied primarily on telephone lines, which were vulnerable to destruction by artillery fire, limiting their ability to coordinate once battle was joined. American forward observers, typically young lieutenants positioned with frontline infantry units, could call fire missions directly to battalion fire direction centers via radio. The process from target identification to rounds impacting could take as little as 3 minutes in well-trained units, and rarely exceeded 5 minutes even under combat conditions. The first Wehrmacht officers to experience American artillery in significant quantities were those who faced the initial American landings in North Africa during Operation Torch in November 1942. These early encounters should have served as warnings, but the context of the North African campaign, with its fluid battles across vast distances and the relative inexperience of American forces, obscured the true implications. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, German forces under Erwin Rommel struck American positions in a series of attacks that exposed weaknesses in American training and tactics. The battle is often remembered as an American defeat, and in tactical terms, that assessment is accurate. American units were pushed back, lost significant equipment, and suffered heavy casualties. But Rommel, even in victory, noted something that troubled him. In an 18 February 1943 letter to his wife, he described the fighting around Kasserine with language that revealed his concerns. He wrote of American artillery directed by observation planes, delivering fire from numerous batteries on all worthwhile targets throughout the zone. This was not the artillery of a defeated army. This was systematic, coordinated. Abundant firepower that suggested capabilities Germany could not match. Other German officers in North Africa noted similar patterns. American artillery seemed to be everywhere, responding quickly to any German movement, firing in volumes that suggested unlimited ammunition stocks. Even when American infantry and armor were driven back, the artillery remained effective, covering retreats and making German pursuit costly. These observations should have prompted serious analysis at the highest levels of German military planning. Instead, they were rationalized as the natural advantages of an army fighting close to its supply bases against an enemy at the end of extended logistics lines. The true test would come in Italy and France, where German forces would face American artillery under conditions that eliminated such excuses. The Italian campaign, beginning with the invasion of Sicily in July 1943 and continuing through the grinding battles up the Italian peninsula, provided German commanders with extended exposure to American artillery operations. At Salerno in September 1943, German counterattacks came close to driving American forces back into the sea. The battle was decided not by infantry or armor, but by the concentrated fire of American artillery, reinforced by naval gunfire from ships offshore. German after-action reports noted that American artillery fire was heavier, more accurate, and more rapidly delivered than anything they had experienced on the Eastern Front. At Monte Cassino, the bitter fight for the Gustav Line that dragged on from January through May 1944, American artillery demonstrated capabilities that German defenders found difficult to credit. Artillery barrages could be called down on targets with what seemed to German observers to be impossible speed. Forward observers with American infantry could bring fire missions onto German positions within minutes of identifying targets. More troubling was the accuracy. German strong points, carefully camouflaged and positioned for maximum defensive advantage, were systematically destroyed by American artillery fire that seemed to locate them with uncanny precision. Wehrmacht reports from the Italian theater began using language that suggested a shift from tactical analysis to psychological impact. Artillery fire was described as overwhelming, incessant, devastating, crushing. These were not the careful technical assessments typical of German military reporting. They were the words of men who were being broken by an experience they had not been trained to endure. One report from a battalion of the 1st Parachute Division, an elite formation, stated that casualties from American artillery exceeded casualties from all other causes combined. This single sentence reveals the transformation in German tactical reality. Artillery, traditionally a supporting arm, had become the primary killer on the battlefield. A division that prided itself on aggressive infantry tactics and close combat excellence was being destroyed by shells fired from kilometers away by gunners they would never see. The true dimensions of American artillery superiority became undeniable during Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy in late July 1944. The operation was designed as a concentrated attack on a narrow front, using overwhelming force to shatter German defensive positions and create an opening for armored exploitation. Air power would play a major role, with heavy bombers carpet-bombing German positions before the ground attack. But the artillery preparation was unprecedented in its scale and coordination. More than 1,000 divisional and corps artillery pieces were committed to the offensive. This concentration, over 1,000 guns supporting a single operation, exceeded anything Germany could assemble in the West by mid-1944. Approximately 140,000 artillery rounds were allocated to VII Corps alone, with another 27,000 for VII Corps. These numbers represented not just firepower, but a logistical achievement that German forces could no longer dream of matching. On 25 July 1944, when Operation Cobra was launched, German forces occupying the target zone experienced what General Fritz Bayerlein, commander of Panzer Lehr Division, would later describe in language that became infamous. Panzer Lehr, an elite formation composed of demonstration troops and training personnel from German armored schools, was one of the finest divisions in the Wehrmacht. It had been heavily engaged since D-Day, but remained a formidable force, well-equipped and professionally led. Bayerlein positioned his division along the expected axis of the American attack, confident that even if the bombardment was heavy, his troops could recover and mount an effective defense. The aerial bombardment came first, heavy bombers dropping thousands of tons of explosives on Panzer Lehr's positions. This was devastating, but Bayerlein had experienced heavy bombing before. His troops were dispersed, dug in, prepared to endure and then fight. When the bombers departed, Bayerline expected a pause before American ground forces attacked, time to reorganize and prepare. Instead, the artillery barrage began immediately. Over 1,000 guns, pre-positioned and coordinated through American fire direction centers, opened fire in a bombardment that lasted for hours. The concentration of fire was unlike anything Bayerline had experienced in 6 years of war. Shells fell continuously, not in salvos or waves, but in an unending cascade that walked across Panzer Lehr's positions with methodical thoroughness. Trees were shredded. Vehicles were destroyed. Fortified positions collapsed. Men were buried alive in their foxholes or killed by blast and fragmentation. Communication trenches caved in. Command posts were obliterated. The division's artillery, carefully positioned to support the defense, was located and destroyed by American counter-battery fire before it could engage effectively. Radio communications broke down as antennas were destroyed and radios buried under debris. Telephone lines, the backup system, had been cut by the bombing and were now being chewed to fragments by artillery fire. By late afternoon, Panzer Lehr Division had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. When American infantry and armor advanced, they encountered not an organized defense but scattered survivors, dazed and disorganized, offering only sporadic resistance. Bayerline's post-battle report included a sentence that would be quoted in histories for decades to come. He stated that his frontline positions looked like the face of the moon, a lunar landscape of overlapping craters where nothing recognizable remained. Of the division's approximately 10,000 men, casualties exceeded 70%. Most of those casualties came from the bombardment, not the ground assault. An elite German armored division, one of the best formations in the Wehrmacht, had been destroyed primarily by artillery fire. The tactical implications were devastating. If American artillery could annihilate an elite division in prepared positions, what hope did lesser formations have? What tactical or operational brilliance could compensate for such firepower disparity? The systematic nature of American artillery operations was perhaps even more psychologically damaging than the raw destructive power. German commanders found themselves trapped in a situation where standard tactical responses made their situation worse. Concentrate forces for an attack, and American artillery would destroy the assembly area. Establish defensive positions, and American artillery would methodically obliterate them. Attempt to withdraw and consolidate, and American artillery would pursue. The American system of forward observers, radio communications, and centralized fire direction centers meant that any movement, any concentration, any tactical adjustment could be detected and engaged with devastating speed. German infantry learned to fear any kind of massing. Platoon-sized formations drew fire. Company-sized formations invited annihilation. Moving along roads, even at night, risked encountering American illumination shells followed by high explosive. Staying dispersed improved survival, but eliminated the mass necessary for effective offensive or defensive action. This tactical paralysis, this inability to mass forces without inviting destruction, represented a fundamental breakdown of German operational doctrine. German military theory, built on concepts of maneuver, concentration of force, and aggressive action, required the ability to move and mass formations at decisive points. When American artillery made such movement suicidal, German commanders found themselves unable to fight the war they had been trained to fight. Reports from German units in France during August and September 1944 reveal the psychological impact. Company commanders reported that men refused to leave their foxholes. Battalion commanders noted declining morale and rising psychiatric casualties. Regimental commanders complained that their units were combat ineffective before even engaging American ground forces. The artillery, the impersonal, inescapable, overwhelming artillery, was breaking German formations before the infantry battle even began. The Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West, launched in December 1944 through the Ardennes forest, provided the ultimate test of American artillery capabilities under adverse conditions. The offensive achieved surprise, with German forces striking through a lightly defended sector during a period of terrible weather that grounded Allied air power. Initial German gains were substantial, with armored spearheads penetrating 50 kilometers into American lines and surrounding the vital road junction at Bastogne. For German commanders, this offensive represented a final opportunity to prove that tactical brilliance and operational skill could overcome material disadvantages. The initial phase seemed to confirm this hope. American units were pushed back, surrounded, or overrun. The weather prevented American air superiority from being brought to bear. German armor, concentrated in ways that had been impossible for months, achieved local superiority and exploited gaps in American lines. But even in these favorable circumstances, German officers noted troubling patterns. American artillery, even in units that were retreating or surrounded, continued to function with devastating effectiveness. At Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division and elements of other units were surrounded and cut off from ground supply for a week, American artillery remained the decisive factor. The German 26th Volksgrenadier Division, along with elements of panzer divisions, attacked the Bastogne perimeter repeatedly, seeking to overwhelm the defenders before relief arrived. Every attack was met with immediate, accurate, concentrated artillery fire that shattered German formations before they could close with American positions. German reports from units attacking Bastogne reveal growing desperation and confusion. One divisional report complained that artillery fire from the Bastogne perimeter was the heaviest and most accurate encountered in the war, with casualties from artillery exceeding casualties from all other causes combined. The report noted that every attack was met with immediate and precisely targeted fire, and concluded with a simple assessment that must have been difficult for the German officer to write. The American artillery is of the highest quality. No caveats, no excuses, just acknowledgement of superior performance. Another report from a battalion commander stated that American artillery fire fell on his assembly area before his attack could begin, causing 30% casualties and forcing cancellation of the operation. The report noted that men were demoralized by constant artillery fire and refused to leave cover. This psychological breakdown, this refusal to attack not because of cowardice, but because of the certainty of destruction, represented a fundamental failure of offensive capability. German units at Bastogne were not defeated by superior numbers or better positions. They were defeated by artillery fire that made movement and attack impossible. When the weather cleared after Christmas and American supply resumed, the artillery fire intensified. During the entire Bulge campaign, 4,155 American artillery pieces fired 1,255,000 rounds, over 1 million shells delivered in approximately 1 month of fighting. German units that had penetrated deep into American lines found themselves trapped and surrounded by forces that could call upon unlimited artillery support. The offensive, planned to drive through to Antwerp and split Allied armies, stalled after less than a week, broken primarily by American artillery. Units that began the offensive at full strength ended with 30 to 40% casualties, with artillery accounting for the majority of losses. One captured German officer, Oberst Heinrich Müller, whose regiment had been destroyed at St. Lo 6 months earlier and reconstituted for the Bulge, provided a stark assessment in his prisoner of war interrogation. He stated that his forces were defeated by American artillery before being defeated by American infantry or armor. Every movement was observed and engaged. Every concentration of forces was broken up before attacks could begin. Every defensive position was smashed before infantry assaults. His conclusion was blunt. They could not move, could not mass, could not defend. They simply absorbed artillery fire until they ceased to exist as an effective force. This testimony, echoed by dozens of other captured German officers, reveals the completeness of American artillery dominance. The weapon system that German doctrine treated as a supporting arm had become, in American hands, the dominant factor on the battlefield. The mobility of American artillery amplified its effectiveness in ways that German forces struggled to counter. While German field artillery remained largely horse-drawn throughout the war, American artillery was fully motorized from the beginning. The implications went far beyond simple movement speed. Motorized artillery could reposition rapidly in response to changing tactical situations, a capability that proved decisive in the fluid fighting in France and Germany. German artillery, once emplaced, could relocate only slowly and with significant effort. The process of limbering guns, hitching horses, moving to a new position, and emplacing again could take hours. American artillery units could displace, move 10 or 15 kilometers, and be ready to fire again within 30 to 40 minutes. This mobility advantage manifested in multiple ways. American artillery could provide support to rapidly advancing infantry and armor without falling behind, maintaining continuous fire support throughout exploitation phases of operations. When German counterattacks developed, American artillery could shift fires rapidly, concentrating multiple battalions on emerging threats within minutes. Perhaps most significantly, American artillery could survive counter-battery fire through rapid displacement. German doctrine called for locating enemy artillery positions and engaging them with counter-battery fire to suppress or destroy them. This required careful observation, calculation of firing positions based on shell trajectories, and coordination of fires onto the identified locations. By the time German counter-battery fire arrived, American guns had often already displaced, leaving only empty firing positions to be shelled. The introduction of self-propelled artillery variants, most notably the M7 Priest mounting a 105mm howitzer on a tank chassis, further enhanced American mobility. These vehicles could accompany armored formations directly, providing immediate fire support without the delays inherent in towed artillery. German attempts to create equivalent systems foundered on resource limitations and production constraints. American artillery also possessed a significant advantage in ammunition supply and logistics that German forces could not match. Every American artillery battalion was supported by extensive ammunition supply units, equipped with trucks capable of delivering thousands of rounds directly to firing positions. Ammunition was stockpiled in forward dumps, positioned to support anticipated operations. When American forces advanced, engineer units improved roads and built bypasses to ensure that artillery supply trucks could maintain continuous flow forward. American ammunition production was not merely abundant, it was standardized to a degree that German production could not match. Every 105mm shell, regardless of which factory produced it, performed identically, allowing fire direction centers to use standard firing tables without compensating for batch variations. Quality control ensured that duds and malfunctions were rare, typically less than 1% of rounds fired. German ammunition production, constrained by resource shortages and dispersed manufacturing facilities, suffered from quality variations that affected accuracy and required gunners to compensate based on ammunition lot numbers. Perhaps most tellingly, American forces could afford to use artillery abundantly without fear of running out. During the battles in France, American artillery units were rarely restricted in their ammunition expenditure. Battalion commanders were told to fire as needed to support operations. Division artillery officers allocated ammunition based on tactical requirements, not scarcity. Even during the temporary ammunition shortages in late 1944, when logistical difficulties created constraints, American artillery expenditures remained higher than German forces could sustain. During 1 week in October 1944, American First Army's 105mm howitzers fired an average of 30 rounds per gun per day. Third Army, operating on more constrained supplies, still managed 11 rounds per gun per day. These rates, considered low by American standards and cause for concern among American commanders, exceeded what German artillery could sustain by factors of 2 to 3. The psychological impact of American artillery superiority on Wehrmacht personnel manifested in ways that transcended simple casualty statistics. German soldiers, particularly those who survived sustained exposure to American artillery, developed a fatalistic acceptance that profoundly affected unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. After-action reports and prisoner interrogations revealed patterns of demoralization that German commanders found difficult to counter. Soldiers who had fought bravely against Soviet artillery on the Eastern Front, who had endured years of combat, described American artillery as uniquely terrifying. The difference was not merely intensity, though American fire was often heavier than anything experienced in the East. The difference was the systematic nature, the apparent omniscience of American observers, and the speed with which fire missions could be delivered. German soldiers learned that any attempt to move, to improve positions, to gather for meals, to receive orders, or to conduct any normal military activity invited artillery fire. The result was a kind of tactical paralysis, where units huddled in whatever cover they occupied, unable to function as military formations. Officers reported that men refused orders to move, not from cowardice, but from the rational calculation that movement meant death. NCOs noted that experienced soldiers, men who had survived multiple campaigns, broke psychologically under sustained artillery fire in ways they never had under other combat stresses. Medical personnel treating German casualties noted increasing rates of psychological trauma directly attributable to artillery fire. Traditional combat fatigue, the stress reaction to infantry combat, was well understood. But the reaction to sustained artillery bombardment was different, manifesting as profound helplessness and fatalism. Men who recovered physically often remained combat ineffective psychologically, unable to function under fire. German commanders attempting to conduct operations in the face of American artillery found that their orders could not be executed. Attack formations would not leave their positions. Defensive units would not conduct the local counterattacks necessary to restore broken lines. Reserves would not move forward to reinforce threatened sectors. The artillery had not merely inflicted casualties, it had broken the fundamental cohesion that allowed units to function. The industrial foundation underlying American artillery superiority was something German military professionals understood intellectually but struggled to accept emotionally. The numbers were staggering. American factories produced 41,000 artillery pieces in various calibers during the war, along with approximately 2.6 billion rounds of ammunition across all calibers. German production, constrained by resource shortages, strategic bombing, and dispersed manufacturing, totaled approximately 38,000 artillery pieces and substantially less ammunition. But raw production numbers told only part of the story. American industry approached artillery production with the same mass manufacturing techniques applied to automobiles and consumer goods. Standardization, interchangeable parts, simplified manufacturing processes, and quality control created weapons that were reliable, easily maintained, and consistent in performance. When an M2 howitzer broke down, replacement parts were readily available and could be installed by unit maintenance personnel with minimal training. When a barrel wore out after extended firing, a replacement could be installed in hours. German artillery, built to tighter tolerances and more complex specifications, required more specialized maintenance and repair. Parts availability was problematic, particularly late in the war. Barrel replacement, when barrels were available at all, required more extensive work. American ammunition production represented an even more impressive industrial achievement. Producing billions of artillery shells required not just manufacturing capacity but systematic quality control, efficient logistics, and sophisticated supply chain management. American shells were packaged, shipped, stored, and delivered to firing units with an efficiency that German logistics officers found incomprehensible. The contrast between American and German artillery logistics was perhaps most stark in the final months of the war. American units advancing into Germany in early 1945 operated with full ammunition allowances, firing at rates limited only by tactical necessity. German artillery, when it could be found at all, rationed ammunition carefully, firing only at critical targets and often ceasing fire to preserve stocks for anticipated emergencies that would never come. The aftermath of the war brought sober German military analysis of what had gone wrong and why. Former Wehrmacht officers, particularly those involved in operational planning and tactical execution, conducted extensive post-war assessments trying to understand how Germany had lost to enemies they had defeated so decisively in the war's opening years. Artillery featured prominently in these analyses. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, wrote in his post-war assessments that American artillery had achieved what Germany believed impossible, transforming artillery from a supporting arm into a dominant weapon system. He noted that American coordination, fire control, logistics, and industrial production created an artillery force that could not be matched by German capabilities regardless of tactical skill or operational planning. Other German military professionals reached similar conclusions. The memoirs and analyses of German commanders consistently identified American artillery as perhaps the single most decisive advantage American forces possessed in the European theater. While tanks and aircraft received public attention and featured prominently in dramatic accounts of battles, artillery was the weapon that actually broke German attacks, supported American advances, and inflicted the majority of casualties. Lieutenant General Fritz von Manteuffel, who commanded panzer armies on both the Eastern and Western fronts, stated in post-war interrogations that American artillery coordination and firepower exceeded anything Germany could produce. He noted that German artillery officers were individually as skilled as their American counterparts, and German guns were equivalent or superior in design. But the Americans had created a system that did not depend on individual superiority. Their system produced consistent, overwhelming, rapidly delivered firepower regardless of individual skill levels. This systematization, this transformation of artillery into an industrial process rather than a martial art, represented a revolution in warfare that Germany never matched and could not match given industrial limitations. The influence of American artillery doctrine and techniques extended far beyond World War II itself, shaping NATO artillery practices and modern fire support doctrines that remain relevant into the 21st century. The Fire Direction Center concept became standard in all modern artillery organizations. The emphasis on coordination, mass fires, and systematic procedures became foundational principles of artillery employment. Time-on-target techniques, refined and improved with computer technology, remain the gold standard for artillery fire missions requiring maximum surprise and effectiveness. The lessons learned by Wehrmacht officers came too late to change the outcome of the war, but they shaped post-war German military thinking profoundly. When West Germany reconstituted its armed forces in the 1950s as part of NATO, German artillery doctrine incorporated American methods wholesale, abandoning the pre-war German emphasis on precision and conservation in favor of American-style mass fires and systematic coordination. The psychological shock experienced by Wehrmacht personnel facing American artillery reverberated through military thinking about firepower, industrial capacity, and the relationship between tactical skill and material superiority. German military professionals, raised in a tradition that emphasized operational art and tactical excellence, were forced to confront the reality that industrial capacity and systematic organization could trump battlefield brilliance. The 10-to-1 firepower advantage that German officers experienced was not merely a matter of having 10 times as many guns or shells, though American advantages in production were substantial. It was a comprehensive superiority in doctrine, training, communications, logistics, and industrial support that created a weapons system fundamentally more capable than anything Germany could field. American artillery crews were not necessarily more skilled than their German counterparts. American fire direction officers were not necessarily more intelligent than German artillery officers. But the American system, the comprehensive integration of technology, doctrine, training, and industrial support, produced results that individual skill could not match. This transformation of warfare, from an arena where tactical skill and operational brilliance could overcome material disadvantages to one where systematic industrial power became decisive, marked a fundamental shift in how wars would be fought. The Wehrmacht, an army that had conquered most of Europe through tactical excellence and operational virtuosity, found itself defeated by an enemy that approached warfare differently, prioritizing systematic coordination and industrial abundance over tactical virtuosity. The tens of thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers who experienced American artillery learned this lesson with their lives and their sanity, discovering that courage and skill offered no protection against an enemy who had industrialized destruction itself. The communications infrastructure supporting American artillery operations represented another dimension of superiority that Wehrmacht officers struggled to comprehend. Every American artillery battalion possessed multiple SCR 610 FM radio sets, powerful radios providing clear, jam-resistant communication across distances of 30 to 40 kilometers. These radios connected fire direction centers to forward observers, to individual batteries, and to higher headquarters, creating a communication web that functioned even under the chaos of combat. German artillery, by contrast, relied primarily on telephone wire, laboriously laid by signal personnel and vulnerable to destruction by shell fire, vehicle traffic, or simple accident. Once telephone communications broke down during combat, which happened regularly, German artillery units lost coordination with forward observers and higher headquarters, forcing them to operate independently with limited awareness of the larger tactical situation. American forward observers, typically young lieutenants or senior NCOs, moved with frontline infantry companies, equipped with radios that allowed direct communication with battalion fire direction centers. When a target was identified, a German machine gun position, a mortar team, an assembly of troops, or an armored vehicle, the forward observer could initiate a fire mission within seconds. The standard American call for fire procedure was systematically efficient. The observer transmitted 6 essential elements: his own position, the target location, the target description, the type of fire mission desired, the method of engagement, and the method of fire control. This information, typically transmitted in less than 30 seconds, provided the fire direction center with everything needed to calculate firing data and engage the target. The Fire Direction Center, staffed by specialists trained in ballistic computation, used graphical firing tables and mechanical calculators to determine range, deflection, charge, and fuse settings for each battery. Multiple variables were incorporated into these calculations. The distance from each gun to the target, obviously, but also the difference in altitude between gun and target, air temperature and density, wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes, the rotation of the Earth, propellant temperature, barrel wear on individual guns, and even the lot number of the ammunition being fired. American ammunition manufacturers provided detailed ballistic data for each production batch, allowing fire direction centers to compensate for minor variations in propellant burn rates or projectile weights. This level of systematic precision meant that American first-round accuracy was substantially better than German equivalents. Studies conducted after the war suggested that American artillery achieved target hits within 50 meters on first salvos approximately 60% of the time, compared to 30 to 40% for German artillery. The difference lay not in superior guns or ammunition, but in superior fire control systems and communication infrastructure. The speed of American fire missions shocked German observers. From target identification by a forward observer to shells impacting could take as little as 3 minutes in well-trained units. 5 minutes was typical. 10 minutes was considered slow and would prompt investigation into what had delayed the mission. German fire missions, using telephone communications and less systematized fire direction procedures, typically required 15 to 30 minutes from target identification to shells on target. In fast-moving situations, where targets appeared and disappeared rapidly, this delay often meant that German artillery engaged empty positions while American artillery destroyed actual targets. The implications for infantry combat were profound. American infantry, knowing that artillery support could arrive within minutes of being requested, operated with confidence that German infantry could not match. When encountering resistance, American infantry doctrine called for pinning the enemy position with small arms fire and immediately calling for artillery. German defensive positions that might have held against infantry assault alone were systematically destroyed by artillery before American infantry closed, reducing casualties and accelerating advances. German defenders facing American artillery learned that their traditional defensive tactics were inadequate. Constructing strong points with overlapping fields of fire, the foundation of German defensive doctrine, simply provided concentrated targets for American artillery. Dispersing forces to avoid artillery fire eliminated the concentration necessary for effective defense. Every tactical option led to failure. German after-action reports from late 1944 and early 1945 reveal tactical paralysis born of this impossible situation. One report from a regiment of the 352nd Infantry Division, defending in the Hürtgen Forest in November 1944, described the American attack pattern with language suggesting resigned acceptance. American infantry would probe German positions until meeting resistance. Once resistance was identified, American infantry would withdraw to covered positions and call artillery. The artillery barrage would last 15 to 45 minutes, systematically destroying the German position. American infantry would then advance through the ruins, encountering only scattered survivors. The report concluded that there was no effective defense against this tactic. Constructing stronger fortifications simply meant more men were buried when the position was destroyed. Defending with fewer troops meant insufficient forces to hold against the infantry assault. The only option was to withdraw before artillery could be called, but continuous withdrawal meant surrendering ground without fighting, which was unacceptable to higher command. This fundamental dilemma, fight and be destroyed by artillery, or withdraw and be accused of cowardice, broke German defensive capabilities psychologically before American infantry ever reached German lines. Officers could not in good conscience order men to defend positions when defense meant certain death from artillery fire. Soldiers could not be expected to hold positions when every attack followed the same pattern of overwhelming bombardment followed by infantry exploitation. The mobility advantage American artillery possessed over German forces multiplied the effectiveness of American firepower in ways that tactical analysis alone cannot fully capture. Wehrmacht artillery remained approximately 80% horse-drawn throughout the war, despite popular images of German mechanization. The iconic images of German panzer columns and motorized infantry obscure the reality that the majority of German divisions relied on horses for artillery transport, supply, and logistics. Each German infantry division required approximately 5,000 horses to move its artillery, supply trains, and support units. These horses required daily feeding, grooming, veterinary care, and rest. A horse-drawn artillery battery needed approximately 1 hour to limber guns, hitch teams, move to a new position, and in place for firing. During that hour, the battery was completely vulnerable and incapable of providing fire support. Movement over distances exceeding 30 kilometers, the daily travel limit for horses, required multiple days and elaborate planning. Compare this to American artillery, fully motorized from the beginning. American artillery could receive a displacement order, limber guns to trucks or tractors, move 15 kilometers, and be ready to fire again within 30 to 45 minutes. Self-propelled variants like the M7 Priest could displace even faster, moving with armored formations and providing fire support without ever unlimbering. This mobility differential manifested in operational tempo. American forces could advance rapidly, confident that artillery support would keep pace. German forces found that rapid movement meant leaving their artillery behind, breaking the fundamental combined arms coordination that made German tactics effective. During the pursuit across France in August and September 1944, American armored divisions advanced so rapidly that German forces could not establish defensive positions before being overrun. German artillery, limited by horse mobility, could not reposition quickly enough to support defensive efforts. When German units attempted to establish defensive lines, American artillery would be in position and firing before German guns arrived. The German solution, abandoning horse-drawn artillery and replacing it with motorized transport, was impossible given fuel shortages and vehicle production constraints. German synthetic fuel production, targeted by Allied bombing and limited by resource shortages, could barely support existing mechanized forces. Fully motorizing German artillery would have required fuel allocations that simply did not exist. The logistics underlying American artillery operations represented an industrial achievement as impressive as the weapons themselves. Every American artillery battalion was supported by dedicated ammunition supply units, equipped with trucks capable of hauling thousands of rounds from supply dumps to firing positions. These supply units operated continuously, maintaining ammunition stocks at battalion level regardless of expenditure rates. Forward ammunition dumps, positioned within 15 to 20 kilometers of frontline artillery positions, held thousands of tons of shells, organized by caliber and type, ready for immediate delivery. American logistics doctrine called for maintaining a 72-hour supply of ammunition at division level and an additional 90-day supply at Army level, ensuring that temporary surges in artillery expenditure would not exhaust stocks. German ammunition logistics, by comparison, struggled with constrained production, limited transport capacity, and systematic targeting by Allied aircraft. German ammunition production never recovered from the strategic bombing campaigns that destroyed factories and dispersed manufacturing. By late 1944, German artillery units were rationing ammunition to levels that made effective fire support impossible. While American divisions were firing hundreds of rounds per gun per day, German divisions were limited to 20 to 30 rounds per gun per day, and often substantially less. The psychological impact of this disparity on German gunners was severe. Artillery crews trained to provide fire support for infantry found themselves unable to respond to fire missions due to ammunition shortages. German infantry, attacking or defending, could not count on artillery support, breaking the combined arms coordination that had made Wehrmacht tactics effective in earlier campaigns. American forces, knowing that German artillery response would be limited, could operate with reduced concern for counter-battery fire, further amplifying American artillery effectiveness. The quality differential in ammunition production further advantaged American forces in ways that raw production numbers do not fully capture. American artillery ammunition was manufactured in dedicated plants with rigorous quality control, standardized processes, and systematic testing. The result was ammunition that functioned consistently and reliably. Dud rates for American artillery ammunition were typically below 1%, meaning that 99 of every 100 shells fired would explode as designed. German ammunition production, constrained by resource shortages and reliant increasingly on slave labor and POWs working under brutal conditions, suffered from quality problems that worsened as the war progressed. Workers forced to manufacture ammunition for an enemy they hoped would lose had numerous opportunities for subtle sabotage, introducing moisture into propellant charges, failing to properly seat fuses, introducing foreign material into shell bodies. The result was ammunition that often failed to explode or functioned erratically. One well-documented example occurred at Anzio in early 1944, where German long-range 170mm guns bombarded the Allied beachhead from positions beyond the range of American counter-battery fire. These guns should have inflicted severe damage on the crowded beachhead, but post-battle analysis revealed that approximately 70% of German shells were duds, failing to explode on impact. Whether this resulted from sabotage, quality control failures, or manufacturing constraints is unclear, but the effect was to render German artillery substantially less effective than gun and crew capabilities would suggest. American ammunition production, drawing on willing workers and rigorous oversight, avoided these quality problems. American artillery crews could be confident that their ammunition would function as designed, allowing them to focus on tactical employment rather than worrying about duds and misfires. The prisoner of war interrogations conducted by American intelligence officers in late 1944 and early 1945 provided direct testimony from Wehrmacht personnel about the psychological impact of American artillery superiority. These interrogations, conducted while memories were fresh and before prisoners could develop post-war narratives, offer unfiltered assessments from men who had experienced American artillery firsthand. One interrogation of Hauptmann Klaus Weber, captured near Aachen in October 1944, reveals the demoralization American artillery inflicted. Weber commanded a company of the 89th Infantry Division, an experienced unit that had fought in Russia before being transferred west. When asked to compare Russian and American artillery, Weber stated that Russian artillery was heavier in weight of shells, but American artillery was more frightening because of its accuracy and speed. He described American artillery as appearing almost instantly whenever his company attempted to move or attack, with shells arriving on target before his men could seek cover. Weber noted that casualties from American artillery exceeded all other causes combined, and stated that after 2 weeks facing American artillery, his company refused to leave their foxholes even when ordered to attack. Another interrogation of Oberleutnant Franz Schultz, captured during the Battle of the Bulge, provided even more damning assessment. Schultz, a platoon leader in the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, described the attack on Bastogne as hopeless from the beginning due to American artillery. Every approach to American lines was covered by pre-registered artillery fire that arrived within seconds of German troops being detected. Every assembly area was shelled before attacks could begin. Every attempt to concentrate forces for assault invited immediate and devastating artillery response. Schultz stated that his platoon, which began the offensive with 42 men, was reduced to 11 men by artillery fire before ever engaging American infantry. The survivors, Schultz noted, were psychologically broken, incapable of aggressive action, and could only huddle in whatever cover they occupied waiting for the next barrage. These testimonies, multiplied across hundreds of interrogations, reveal a consistent pattern. Wehrmacht soldiers and officers, even those with years of combat experience on the Eastern Front, found American artillery uniquely devastating. The speed of response, the accuracy of fire, the volume of shells, and the systematic coordination of American artillery operations created a level of firepower that German forces could neither match nor effectively counter. The result was not merely tactical defeat but psychological collapse. the breaking of unit cohesion and fighting spirit that turned Wehrmacht formations from effective military units into collections of traumatized individuals waiting for the war to end. The 10-to-1 firepower advantage that Wehrmacht officers described was not hyperbole or exaggeration. It was, if anything, an underestimate of the true disparity. When American artillery could respond to targets within minutes, while German artillery required tens of minutes. When American ammunition was unlimited, while German ammunition was rationed. When American guns could fire sustained rates double or triple German rates. When American coordination brought multiple battalions onto single targets, while German batteries fought in isolation. The cumulative advantage exceeded 10-to-1, approaching 20 or 30-to-1 in actual destructive effect delivered to targets. This disparity, more than any other single factor, explains why German forces that had conquered most of Europe in 1940 and 1941 were systematically destroyed in 1944 and 1945. German tactical skill, operational art, and fighting spirit could not overcome American industrial firepower systematically applied. The post-war analysis conducted by Wehrmacht officers attempting to understand their defeat consistently identified American artillery as the decisive weapon system of the Western European campaign. These analyses, conducted by professional military officers with years of combat experience, reached conclusions that emphasized system-level superiority rather than individual tactical factors. General Hermann Bauk, one of the Wehrmacht's most respected armor commanders, stated in post-war interrogations that American artillery coordination was the most significant advantage American forces possessed. Bauk noted that German artillery was equivalent or superior to American artillery in gun design and crew training, but the American fire control system, the communication infrastructure, and the logistical support created capabilities that Germany could not match. He specifically cited time-on-target techniques as revolutionary, stating that the ability to deliver concentrated fires without warning eliminated German defensive options. Colonel General Kurt von Tippelskirch, who commanded armies on both Eastern and Western fronts, drew similar conclusions. In his post-war writings, Tippelskirch stated that American artillery fire control and coordination methods were a generation ahead of German practices. He noted that individual German artillery officers understood the principles of massed fires and coordinated fire missions, but the German military system lacked the communication infrastructure and systematic organization to implement these principles at scale. American forces, Tippelskirch observed, had created a system where average artillery officers using standardized procedures could achieve results that German artillery could only produce through exceptional individual skill. This systematization, this transformation of artillery employment from art to industrial process, represented a fundamental shift in warfare that Germany never matched. The Industrial Revolution in warfare that many historians associate with World War I, the transition from small professional armies to mass industrial forces, reached its culmination in World War II American artillery operations. Courage, skill, and tactical brilliance, the traditional virtues of military excellence, were rendered insufficient by systematic organization, industrial production, and technological coordination. The legacy of American artillery superiority in World War II extends far beyond the immediate tactical and operational impacts on that conflict. The doctrinal innovations, organizational structures, and technological systems developed by American artillery officers during the war became the foundation for NATO artillery practices throughout the Cold War and remain influential in the 21st century. The Fire Direction Center concept, centralized coordination of artillery fires, became universal in modern militaries. The emphasis on speed of response, massed fires, and systematic procedures shaped artillery training and doctrine across Western military forces. Time-on-target techniques, refined and improved with computer fire control systems, remain the standard for surprise artillery attacks. The lesson that Wehrmacht officers learned, that systematic coordination and industrial support could create decisive military advantage regardless of individual tactical skill, influenced post-war military thinking profoundly. When West Germany reconstituted its armed forces in the 1950s as part of NATO, German artillery doctrine abandoned the pre-war emphasis on conservation and precision, adopting instead American-style massed fires, rapid response, and abundant ammunition expenditure. The psychological dimension of artillery warfare, demonstrated so dramatically in 1944 and 1945, shaped Cold War military planning around firepower dominance. NATO forces, facing numerically superior Warsaw-packed armies, built strategies around using artillery and air power to destroy Soviet formations before they could achieve breakthrough, essentially applying at theater level the same principles American artillery used at division level in World War II. The realization that modern warfare had become industrial, that tactical brilliance could not overcome systematic firepower superiority, influenced everything from force structure to weapons development to training philosophy. For the Wehrmacht officers who experienced American artillery and survived to reflect on it, the lesson was bitter but clear. Germany had built the finest army in the world, measured by tactical skill, operational art, and fighting spirit. That army had conquered Poland in weeks, France in 6 weeks, and driven hundreds of kilometers into Russia. But fighting spirit and tactical excellence could not overcome an enemy who approached warfare as an industrial process, who could bring overwhelming firepower to bear anywhere, at any time, with systematic precision. The 10-to-1 firepower advantage was not merely a matter of having more guns or more shells, though American advantages in production were substantial. It was a comprehensive superiority in doctrine, organization, training, communications, logistics, and industrial support that created a weapon system Germany could neither match nor effectively counter. The Wehrmacht had built an army to fight the war of movement and tactical brilliance. America had built an army to apply industrial firepower systematically and overwhelmingly. When these two approaches to warfare collided on the battlefields of France, Italy, and Germany, the outcome was never in doubt. Tactical excellence could win battles, but industrial firepower won wars. The Wehrmacht officers who watched American artillery shells arrive without warning, in volumes they could not match, coordinated with precision they could not achieve, had learned this lesson in the most direct way possible. They had fought brilliantly, bravely, and skillfully. And they had lost to an enemy who did not need to fight brilliantly, because they could fight systematically, abundantly, and overwhelmingly. This story of how German military professionals came to realize they were not merely outnumbered or outfought, but fundamentally outmatched by a different approach to warfare itself, represents one of the most significant transformations in military history, the final triumph of industrial warfare over martial virtue. If this account has given you a deeper understanding of how industrial power transformed World War II, consider exploring more stories from this defining conflict. The war was decided not just by heroes and battles, but by factories, logistics, and the systematic application of overwhelming force, a reality that shaped the world we live in today.